On November 4th, 2014, The Binding of Isaac Rebirth was released on Steam, a sequel/successor to the original Binding of Isaac. Along with a graphical overhaul, new levels, and new items, new characters were included in Rebirth, including this character, the Lost. The Lost was meant as a serious challenge for anyone looking to 100% the game, as the Lost dies in one hit under nearly any circumstance, unless the player found an item like the Holy Mantle. And as it was meant to be a massive challenge, unlocking the Lost would also be a similarly massive challenge. Dying in a sacrifice room with the missing poster trinket as certain characters would give these puzzle pieces, which would tell you what character to play, where to die, and what to be killed by, and by doing these in a specific order, the Lost would be unlocked. It was a very interesting ARG-like puzzle, so it's a shame that that's not how the Lost was first unlocked. Rather, the Lost's existence was data mined within a week of the game releasing on Steam, along with the method used to unlock it. This quite famously led to the immense and vocal disappointment of the two lead developers, Edmund McMillan and Tyrone Rodriguez.
Thank you.
I love it. Okay, listen, we're going to wind this down. Quick question from Sakoto. I got 2 more questions for you guys. Sakoto just wants to know, so you guys put a lot of secrets in Isaac and a lot of, codes, a lot of seeds. And I remember there was a thing about how you don't want people to spoil them. So my question to you guys is, there's a lot of stuff that still hasn't been discovered yet?
People already fucking fucked it up. They all
messed it. They swallowed a $100 steak with one bite.
Yeah, no, Tyrone's analogy is the right analogy. It is true.
They're crackheads.
They couldn't resist it. They had to break it apart. And even though people were fucking actively working on some of the biggest secrets that would have taken a while to unfold, they said, no! I want it all now! And then they arped it.
And then they spoiled it for the rest of us.
It's disheartening. Like, it sucks because it's like, well, we're going to start working on an expansion soon, but we sure as hell aren't going to fucking take all the time that it took, especially with Simon, who tried his best to, like, really bury this stuff so it would deter people from doing this, but all they see it is a challenge, so they're just going to dive right in and do it either way. But I can say right now that I don't think the expansion is going to feature any buried secrets that that anybody will care about. I mean, it
was months of our life trying to have between Ed and me and Simon, like, hey, Ed had this really crazy idea, it was awesome, and then Simon and I were like, let's do it, this is awesome, some people won't find this for years. Nope, 1 week.
Nobody likes to wait anymore. They want to eat it now.
Yep.
One thing I have learned when it comes to this sort of stuff too, because I buried some stuff in old Isaac that I thought wouldn't be uncovered, and it wasn't. It was legitimately uncovered, but faster than I thought it would, and I thought I would go even further, and I thought I went really far with this one, but I think I've learned that there's no point in really doing that stuff, and the best way to hide a secret is to just put it locked in a very challenging area. So I think if we end up doing anything like that for the expansion, that it'll be behind a barrier of entry that means having a certain skill level and not something that I thought was really fun in a community-based kind of ARG situation, which would have been nice if it was allowed to take place. But whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lessons were learned from the unfortunate way The Lost was first discovered, that if a game is popular enough, it will be searched in and out, even in ways the developer didn't intend, to find everything. And this is why I want to talk about FEZ. FEZ is the most unique game I have ever played. It's also one of the most heavily flawed I've ever played. It suffers from a wealth of strange bugs, a cluttered map interface, and, most importantly, a failure to convey puzzle concepts to new players. FEZ is very inaccessible when starting the game for the first time, but breaking through that barrier brings one of the most intriguing games ever made. I don't expect anyone to play and enjoy FEZ on their own. The type of challenge provided is definitely not for everyone. It wasn't even for me when I first tried the game, but I want to show people why FEZ was released in 2012, but we are still able to talk about its unsolved mysteries. In the interest of making this video as accessible as possible to people who have not played FEZ, I would like to go through the ideal blind playthrough. A blind playthrough this perfect is highly unlikely, especially given this game's intensely cryptic nature, but I think it's important to understand the kind of game FEZ is. So let's start from the very beginning. In FEZ, you play as this little pale guy, Gomez, who starts the game living in this small, cozy, two-dimensional village with other little pale people. On this particular day, Gomez receives a letter from Geezer, the town's elder, inviting him to the top of the village. Upon reaching the top, this happens. This is the hexahedron which bestows onto Gomez the titular FEZ. With this, the hexahedron shatters, its pieces spreading across the world, and the game restarts. Back at the village, an entirely new dimension is revealed to Gomez through the FEZ. The FEZ allows him to see sides of the world never before imagined by him and the others in his village, through the use of the third dimension. He also meets Dot, which is essentially a tutorial character, and with this, Gomez's quest to reconstruct the hexahedron begins. There are some parts of this opening that will be important later, but for now, that is the opening of FEZ. The ideal blind playthrough of FEZ can be cleanly split into 3 layers, which are all essentially 3 different genres. The first layer is a collectathon platformer with light puzzle elements. The first kind of collectible players will come across are the normal yellow cubes, of which 32 exist. This is the main thing players will be collecting for the first layer. There's not much to talk about, so let's talk about the ideal movement from the first layer to the second. There are many possible jumping off points to the second layer. During the opening, these weird giant people speak in a strange language, punctuated by the strange sound that comes along with it. In the village, there's this room with a boiler in it with some strange symbols on paper covering the walls. And even having collected the treasure map in this room, the room is still uncompleted on the map, showing a question mark icon. There's also this room that literally just has a QR code pasted on the wall, which gives a code, a series of shoulder button presses that reveal a new kind of cube, an anti-cube. There are also 32 of these. As Dot says, for every cube there is an anti-cube, a negative for every positive. The anti-cubes are the main collectible of this second layer, which transitions the game from a lighthearted collectathon platformer with light puzzle elements into an intensely cryptic secret code-solving puzzler. So what was that strange language the giants spoke in the beginning? What's with the stuff in the boiler room in the village? Let's go through them one by one. In this room, there's this stone structure that displays a different tetramino depending on which button is being pressed. With these, you get a sort of code system. But players also have to learn to decipher the most common form of these secret code puzzles, which are these weird squiggly lines. There's a classroom behind the 8-cube door that tells the player how to separate each tetramino in these lines, which produces a code. That's how the game teaches players what it's likely its most important lesson, since most anti-cubes are locked behind these types of puzzles. And it's so much harder than I made it sound. These rooms are literally across the game world from each other, and the leaps in logic that would have to be taken to reach these conclusions are not something you can expect from a general audience. And this isn't even the hardest puzzle. These symbols are FEZ's number system, which is taught in this room with these 5 equations across 2 blackboards. It shows that both these symbols represent the same number, which is 3, along with a few other equations that equal 10. The way FEZ's numerical system works is that the numbers 1 through 4 are represented through these symbols with only one line, and you can combine these lines in the same box to add them together, making higher numbers up to 10. It makes sense when laid out like that, but comprehending this set of rules without outside guidance based on this show-don't-tell model is a ridiculous expectation, and this isn't even the hardest puzzle. Now that I've gotten through the flawed bits, it's time to start gushing about everything else in the game. Let's start with this room. This is one of the best rooms in FEZ, if not the best, and it contains what I believe to be its greatest puzzle. You can derive the game's entire alternate alphabet from these 2 images. See if you can do it yourself. I'll even zoom in on the only relevant parts. Figure it out? Here's the solution. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Think about what just happened. FEZ is able to teach players an entirely new alphabet by reducing one of the most common pangrams used in the English language, condensing it down into a single symbol, and just placing it next to the sentence it correlates to. It's brilliant in its simplicity. There's no room that blatantly tells players a one-to-one translation from English. Its only misstep is just how cryptic it is, which is a running theme. And this isn't even the hardest puzzle. But with this information, players have almost all the information necessary to find every anti-cube. Some of the most interesting platforming challenges in the game are hidden behind this knowledge, like the sink and glitch rooms. But the game isn't so straightforward after learning its rules, because there are plenty of variations on this mechanic. There's this room outside the cave area, in which the code is the terrain of the level itself. The observatory has a code written by the stars that show up at night. There are even non-secret code puzzles, like talking to the owls and using maps to find invisible platforms. On top of that, after collecting 32 cubes and seeing the first ending, entering New Game Plus gives Gomez the glasses instead of the fez. This allows for first-person mode, which gives another completely different perspective, allowing players to see the floors and ceilings of the game's levels, which are fully modeled and textured. And some puzzles, like these pillars with the impossible floating dots in the middle, actually require the glasses to see codes on the floor. Through this, FEZ's mid-game stays interesting by constantly iterating on its fairly simple code deciphering system. And along the way is a very cryptically important moment. I mentioned the doors that are locked behind a certain number of cubes, which are shown to players immediately upon leaving the tutorial area. The most important is the 16-cube door, but before we go in, some more background. FEZ is a very lonely game. Outside of the starting village, players will not find many other characters to talk to, with only 3 other types of character found in the world. 1, Dot, the tutorial character, obviously. 2, the ghosts in the graveyard, which are optional secrets to add flavor to the area. And 3, the owls, which the game doesn't telegraph you can talk to at all, and they only spout bizarre ramblings about her sacred geometry and the 64-bit name of God. It seems that the only conscious living things in this world inhabit the first village. That is, until you go through the 16-cube door. All this time, there's been a massive society of another race of people living in similar isolation to Gomez's village. This city is a working replica of the ruins seen in another area in the game, making this discovery mean more in the context of what semblance of a story this game has, as a sort of archaeological discovery. The player may not have realized it, but the whole game is spent following the trail of this ancient society, finding their artifacts and decoding their language, which makes this discovery mean something, even though it's not explicitly stated to be this important. But what is obvious is the aesthetics of this moment. The city is beautiful and vibrantly presented, with many times the population of Gomez's village. There are multiple building projects across the city, showing this to be a functional and prosperous society. This entire other world is hidden to everyone in Gomez's village, making this a monumental moment of unprecedented beauty in an otherwise empty and lonely world. And to match this moment, an equally beautiful piece of music plays, simply titled Majesty. FEZ is full of beautiful pieces of music. The synth instruments used in the soundtrack are not usually used for the slower drones of this game's melodies, but it turns out to work superbly. Many songs feel incredibly large, like Legend and Compass. Puzzle perfectly sets the cryptic, confusing tone of many of the game's cryptic, confusing puzzles. And those puzzle rooms that don't have music have this strange droning synth ambience. Beyond is loud and discordant, fitting the strange and bizarre alien planet beyond the Stargate. It even features a leitmotif from Legend. Continuum plays during the game's ending, which beautifully fits the slow deconstruction of the game's world. Write something about every song in this game, but I'd rather not bore anyone, so I suggest you go listen to the soundtrack yourself if you haven't. It's worth your time. That was a decently long tangent, but let's get back to the layers. So, what could possibly be contained in the third layer of FEZ? Well, once the player has all 64 cubes, there are still 3 rooms on the map that have a secret indicator on them. These 3 rooms hide these red cubes, the most difficult collectibles to obtain in FEZ. This is the point where the game turns from that cryptic code-solving puzzler into... well, I can't exactly fit it into a conventional genre, but the final puzzles are most comparable to ARGs. I think you'll understand. The easiest to obtain of the 3 is found in the observatory. In this frame, there are actually 2 stars in the corner blinking in and out of sight. These 2 stars are actually blinking in binary. Left star is 1, right star is 0, which translates into hex, then to ASCII, which translates to a code. That reveals the first red cube. And this isn't even the hardest puzzle. The second is this room. The text on the floating block reads, "Please answer the security question, what is my name?" And, security question hint, my first half is what it is, my second half is half of what made it. The answer is Metatron, with the second half referring to the name of the dev studio that made FEZ, Polytron. That reveals the second red cube. And this isn't even the hardest puzzle. At last, we finally get to the title of this video. This room seems to have nothing in it other than some candles and some creepy ambience. If you look in first person, the ground has this unique pattern on it which correlates to this treasure map. When the player stands on this specific point and puts in the code on the map, a strange pitch black thing appears from the ground. This is the Monolith. And from this point on, you're on your own. The other half of the map is burnt off, so the second code is nowhere to be found. You can just sit here staring at this unsolvable puzzle. You can scour the entire map looking for some kind of clue, but the Monolith will not budge. So how was the Monolith solved? The solution was discovered within a week of the game first releasing, through brute force effort by the members of the FEZ GameFAQs board. An external website was set up to give out untested codes to the participants, and eventually, the Monolith was cracked, and the third red cube was discovered. But this solved puzzle only left another. How was the Monolith meant to be solved? What was the intended solution of this incredibly obtuse puzzle? Following shortly after the solution, a theory was crafted, an answer that would have been far more difficult to discover than the method of brute force. FEZ released on Xbox Live Arcade on April 13th, 2012. From this, we get the release date number, 4132012. The tome's page order is 15263748. The release date number in the tome's order becomes 4011322. Then we can translate this into the game's number system. When leaned on the side like this, like a Tetramino code, we get this. When read backwards, it becomes this. If we think of these as arrows, we get this. The Monolith code is down down, LT RT RT, jump up. It is an absolutely insane theory, so far out of the realm of possibility being discovered without a reverse engineering, that had FEZ not gathered a relatively large audience, the Monolith likely never would have been solved. But it was the best theory anyone could think of, until 2019, when the gameplay programmer for FEZ, Renaud Bedard, went onto the FEZ subreddit to let everyone know that the release date theory was impossible, given that they couldn't schedule the release on Xbox Live Arcade that precisely. And with that, we're back to square one. The Monolith is no more solved than it was before. If the Lost was a $100 steak swallowed in one bite, the Monolith is a $10 steak designed to never be swallowed. And this isn't even the hardest puzzle. But before we get to that, there are a few other unsolved mysteries to go over. In the same room that teaches the number system, there are these pieces of paper on the walls that have numbers on them, and the blackboard has a strange CubeNet on it, along with some other numbers below it. What they truly mean is a mystery, but there have been a few developments. First, and most obvious, all these numbers add up to 64, but that doesn't mean much other than being thematically relevant. What's more interesting is that those numbers can be used as coordinates, which points to an abandoned Air Force base in Arizona. A few people have gone there, even one trip with a metal detector, but nothing has been found past that. The tome artifact is unique among other artifacts in the game because you can open it like a book, obviously, and it has text in it. The writing is mostly flavorful haikus, but what's more interesting is the large letters on every other page. When read in the correct order of the tome's pages, it reads PEABEUAB. No one knows exactly what the purpose of these letters are. It could easily just be more flavor with nothing to do with anything else, but who knows. Found throughout the game on floors only visible through first person, the player can find these squares. Each location has a different number of squares, all the way up to 8. Along with this, rotating around after going through the Stargate reveals all 8 squares with 4 owls surrounding them. They are likely just a weird, flavorful Easter egg, but one ring is very different. The set with 4 squares is in the room that has rotation disabled, requiring the turning of this wheel to rotate, which also disables first-person mode. It's literally impossible to see during normal gameplay, but it can be verified to actually be there by looking through the level files. The reason for it being there, or even if it was meant to mean anything, is unknown. The official release of the FEZ soundtrack has an interesting secret. At certain points in certain songs, if put through a spectrogram, there are hidden images in the soundtrack.
Holy Gomez dump.
There's some interesting things in here, like an image of John Locke from Lost eating an orange, a depiction of Harry Truman after his initiation into Freemasonry, and both Salvador Dali and M.C. Escher paintings. I'll put links to the full gallery in the description. You should check them out yourself. The most notable ones are a QR code that gives a list of numbers which have been linked to important dates in the history of space travel, a list of prime numbers, and an image from the 1967 British TV show The Prisoner. Now, finally, we arrive at the actual hardest puzzle in FEZ. Behind the 64 cube door is the Temple of Love, where the 3 red cubes are gathered in the shape of a heart with some nice music in the background. Despite the room being complete on the map, FEZ has one final secret. If you go to the inventory and input 2 codes into the writing cube and number cube respectively, this happens. The game resets, but this time the only thing that's changed is that the red cubes are no longer in the temple and they are unable to be obtained again. So how could this have possibly been discovered by anyone? Well, it was data mined. Within a few days of the game releasing on PC, the first GameFAQs thread about the Heartbreak was opened, and what is potentially FEZ's final secret was found. The nature of FEZ's final puzzles has led to lots of speculation surrounding the game, theories about how puzzles should be solved and how the cluster numbers and soundtrack images fit in. These can be split into 3 schools of thought. There are the nihilists, who believe that the community solved everything the way it was meant to be solved. The Monolith was meant to be brute forced. Heartbreak was meant to be data mined and symbolize the broken hearts of the developers. The other secrets are just that, flavorful but simple Easter eggs. There's also some that take the fact that FEZ briefly had a sequel in development to mean that the sequel would retroactively provide the answers. A common proposal is that the sequel would have the second, burnt-off half of the Monolith treasure map. And lastly are the optimists, who believe that we just haven't looked hard enough, or that the various people that have posted ARGs to the FEZ subreddit are actually in on it and they're just trying to nudge us in the right direction. I'm quite envious of their optimism, but I have a different interpretation. You could say I sympathize more with the nihilists, but I'd like to bring something different in. Let's talk about the story of FEZ. But first, a disclaimer. It's possible that some of the following lore synopsis could be wrong or at least debatable due to how obtuse this game's storytelling is. I think I provide enough evidence for this interpretation, but just know that it might not be 100% correct, and it could be interpreted differently. The remnants of the first civilization in the world of FEZ is found behind the 4-cube door. It is almost entirely two-dimensional, as can be seen by the shape of the houses, as well as rotation being disabled in the interior locations. A one-eyed race created a simple hunter-gatherer society here, depicted by the murals on the indoor walls. But eventually, the owls, described as impossible visitors and our benefactors in the tome, brought the golden gift to them. The golden gift is the knowledge of the third dimension. With this, the ancient race grew a second eye and massive foreheads as a representation of their newfound intellect, becoming the new race of Zoo people. With their newfound knowledge, they immediately set about building a new home, the city of Zoo, the ruins and recreation of which are found in the game. They created the Zooish alphabet and number systems, along with ways to write them. Great monuments were constructed to honor the owls that brought them this glorious gift. A graveyard was built to honor their dead. An industrial district was also built to assist in engineering, which connected to their sewer system. But their undoing would be their greatest creation yet, the Stargate. While building it, there was a freak accident, the result of which can be seen in the ruins of Zoo. It's unclear what the exact results of the accident was, but it was bad enough that some of the Zoo believed that giving up their use of the third dimension would protect them. The result of this belief was the village that Gomez lived in before he received his own golden gift. The remaining Zoo people gave up their gift and returned to their two-dimensional origins, with their foreheads symbolically receding. This is all that happens before Gomez receives the FEZ. The golden gift, or the power of the FEZ, is a straightforward allegory for supernatural enlightenment. Gomez is given an entire new perspective beyond the one side of his village, beautifully demonstrated by the slow rotating pan down across the village. He is given an entire new world to explore with many paths to follow and things to find. But this is only surface level. think about what's really happening. Compared to every other location in the game, Gomez's village is clearly the most vibrant and cheerful location by far. There are many other people walking around, many different animals, and what is by far the most cheerful piece of music present in the game. In comparison, the rest of the game is a lonely and quiet experience. There are almost no characters to talk to that don't speak the Zoo language, and while the game is practically just as vibrant in colors and general visuals, the music is much more quiet and understated. Through his enlightenment, Gomez is thrust from his home into an unknown world where he is separated from almost all contact with his people and is forced to learn the alien rules of this new world. FEZ is about the dangers and disappointments of the otherwise romantic idea of enlightenment. There are two ways it goes about showing this, both narratively and ludonarratively, and let's continue with the narrative. FEZ takes place in a nonsensical world with very loose rules. The way that Gomez interacts with the third dimension is bizarre and nonsensical. A simple change of perspective allows him to cross gaps too large for a jump, to bring a distant piece of land far closer than before, and to cover a long stretch of ground with a single rotation. FEZ takes place in a world where one can enter a lighthouse, go through a door inside it, and enter this massive metallic realm with a floating structure, and an exit at the top leads to the top of that lighthouse. It's a world where one can enter a door and be transported into the background to another piece of land. It's a world where one can enter a log cabin in the woods, and then exit it and be in a completely different location. Even the narrative portrayed through the endings is confusing and practically tone-deaf. The 32 cube ending is a dive into the things that comprise the game's world, set to a synthesized arrangement of a Chopin piece. But at the end, this happens. At this point, does this world have any rules? What could possibly account for what rules it does have? And even more confusingly, how can there be a recreation of an ancient civilization behind a door that requires a strangely specific number of cubes to unlock? This is all explained, but not in the way anyone should be satisfied with. The 64 cube ending is a beautiful disappointment. The game's final reveal is that the game takes place inside a simulation. As the camera pans out from the village, we see the many universes that comprise the simulation, each universe with its own fractured hexahedron and a pointless quest to reconstruct it, and then the simulation shuts off. This is the only possible explanation for the game having those reboot screens. It's the only possible explanation for the bizarre rules the game follows. It's the only possible explanation for the city of Zoo having a populated replica behind the 16-cube door. The 32-cube ending is reframed as the simulation decomposing due to Gomez's failure to reconstruct the hexahedron in this universe ending. But what's more important here is the implication and the disappointment. The player has solved some of the most difficult cryptic puzzles in any game. They've painstakingly searched through the world for every last cube, and their reward is one of the most disappointing endings I've ever seen. But what did you expect? The players that find all the cubes are the outliers. They weren't put off by the practically impossible puzzles, and they failed the test. They find out, along with Gomez, that the game's world was a lie, all because the player forced their way through obscenely difficult puzzles and discovered the pointless truth. The final unsolvable puzzles cement this. They're meant as a sort of punishment to those who pushed past the disappointing ending, hungry for the truth. The only reward for one's efforts of trying to solve every mystery in the game is a brick wall, and past that is just further questions and disappointment. It breaks the message out from narrative into ludonarrative. The ludonarrative of FEZ expands beyond any other game I've ever played because it breaks out of the actual game, out into fan forums theorizing about possible solutions, full of people chasing the high of solving these 8-year-old mysteries, full of people that failed the game's test. With our collective search for enlightenment, we've only discovered more questions in need of answers. It's a feedback loop of misplaced hope and a disappointing reality, and the game has, all this time, been telling us to let go, that the destination isn't worth this pointless journey. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. That got a little more nihilistic than I thought it would, honestly. I'd like to end on a positive note, so let's start with this. That interpretation I gave is just that, interpretation. I think it's a strong interpretation, but even I don't fully subscribe to it. If I did, I would have never touched this game again. FEZ appears in my dreams in all sorts of twisted forms and visions of alternate realities I've only ever had before with games like Mario 64, and for me, that's a sign that a game is doing something right. I can't help but love this game, despite all the disappointment it fills me with. The cancellation of FEZ 2 hurts, the lack of answers for burning questions hurts, but the reason I keep coming back is because of those other people that failed. The people stuck too far down the rabbit hole to stop thinking about this game, just like me. We may never find an answer. Our enlightenment may remain incomplete, but I don't think it matters. I just hope it never ends.